Welcome to another math video on Remedial Math for All. Today we're going to learn how to multiply, divide, and proper fractions. Now let's say we multiply this two fraction, 2 over 4, 5 over 6. Now we can first simplify any fraction that can be simplified. 2 over 4 can be simplified. So 2 over 4 can be reduced to 2 can go into both 2 and 4. So this can be reduced to 1/2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2 time. So this second fraction is already in the simplest form. So this cannot be reduced. So we write it. When you multiply two fractions, you multiply the numerators together and the denominators together after you simplify it. So 1 times 5 is 5. 2 times 6 is 12. Now, because we've already reduced the fraction, the answer will automatically be in the simplest form. Now, let's look at another example. 3/4 times 6 over 5. As we can see, 3/4 is already simplified. 6 over 5 is already simplified, meaning that there is no number beside 1 that can go into 6 and 5. But when we look at the denominator of the first fraction and the numerator of the second fraction, they can be simplified. So with multiplying fraction, you can simplify across. You can cross simplify. So 2 is a number that can go into 4 and 6. So 2 divided by 2. So this is division. 2 divided by, so now we write 3 over 4 divided by 2 is 2 times 6 divided by 2 is 3 over 5. So this is, we reduce the fraction. So now there is no fraction either on the first one or the second one that can be simplified. So this is the simplest form. So now we're just going to multiply across. 3 times 3 is 9. 2 times 5 is 10. And since we already simplified the fraction before we solve it, this is the simplest form. So in order for you to simplify the fraction, either you simplify one fraction at a time. Let's say this fraction could be simplified, you simplify. This fraction could be simplified, you simplify. Or you can simplify across, meaning that you simplify one denominator of one fraction to the numerator of the second fraction. So, or if this was possible, you would have done the same thing. Now let's look at another example. Negative 1 over 5 times 2 over 4 equal. So now we see the first fraction is already reduced, but the second fraction, 2 divided by 4, can be reduced further. So we can divide both the denominator and the numerator by 2. So 2 is the common number. Remember, you have to be able to divide it by the same number. So this can be reduced. So let's rewrite the first fraction. So negative 1/5 times 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now you can just multiply across. Negative 1 times 1, a negative number times a positive number. It's negative because one number is negative, so this is negative 1. Then now you have the 5 times the 2, that's 10. And since we simplified before we solve it, so this answer is to the simplest form. Now let's look at this last example on multiplication. We have negative 4 over 7 times negative 5 over 8. So now let's see if anything can be simplified before we solve this problem. So when we're looking at the first fraction, this cannot be simplified, meaning that there's not a common number that can go into 4 and 7. And when we look at the second fraction, this also cannot be simplified. Let's look at this last example of multiplication. We have -4/7 times -5/8. So there's not a common number that can go into both of them beside 1. So this is already reduced, and this is also already reduced. But when we take the numerator for the first fraction and the denominator for the second fraction, we see that these two numbers are divisible by 4, meaning that 4 can go into -4 and 4 can go into 8. So if we divide 4 by 4, we get what? 1. And if we divide 8 by 4, we get what? 2. So now instead, we have this fraction as -1 because we reduce it over time, -5/2. -1/7 times -5/2. So we reduce this fraction before we can multiply it. So now once you reduce the fraction, you simply follow the procedures where you multiply across the numerators and the denominators. So -1 times -5, a negative and negatives are positive. So this is 5/7 times 2 is 14. So this is the answer because you've already simplified the fraction before you solve it, so the fraction cannot be reduced further. Now we move on to division. Let's say we have 2 divided by 4. That's the first fraction, divided by 3/4. Now, when you're doing division, your goal is to turn that division sign into a multiplication. The way you do that is you keep the first fraction the same. You change the division into multiplication. Then you flip the second fraction. Keep the first one, keep the first fraction the same, change the division into multiplication, and flip the second fraction. Now you can reduce the first fraction. What common number can go into 2 and 4 at the same time? 2. 2 divided by 2 is what? 1. 2 divided by 4 is 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now this reduces to 1/2 times 4/3. Now when we take a look at the fraction, this is simplified, this is already simplified. But if we look at the denominator for the first fraction and the numerator for the second fraction, we see that they can be simplified. There is a common number between these two, which is 2. 2 divided by 2 is what? 1. 2 divided by 4 is 4 divided by 2 is 2. So now we're left with the first fraction, because your goal is to reduce the fraction to the simplest form as possible, times 2/3. Now because all this fraction, both fractions are already reduced, now you can multiply across. You can multiply the numerators by the numerator and the denominators together. So now 1 times 2 is what? 2. 1 times 3 is 3. So your answer is 2/3. The easiest way to solve this is the same problem as we did before. Let's see, after we flip, we keep the first one the same, change the sign, and then flip the second fraction. you could have just simplified this 4 and this 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So now this fraction will reduce to 2 over 1 times 1 over 3. This is simpler. This is easier because now you don't have to simplify further. Because when you take a look at this fraction and this fraction, they reduce, and there's no denominator from the first or the second fraction that can go to the numerator of the first and the second fraction. So this is the simplest form. So you just multiply across. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 3 is 3. So your answer in this case will be 2 over 3. This is the same answer we got, but this is a shorter version. Now let's look at this division. 3 over 4 divided by negative 4 over 5. Remember, this is a division, so your goal is to turn this division sign into multiplication. But you got to follow the steps where you keep the first fraction the same, change the division into multiplication, and flip the second fraction. Now remember, this negative sign can go either for the numerator or the denominator. It doesn't matter because it's just one. As long as one number of the fraction is negative, the whole fraction is negative, okay? So now we turn the division into multiplication. Next step is see if we can simplify. Look at this fraction. You cannot simplify this further, but when you take a look at negative 10 over 4, this cannot be simplified, or you can simplify across one denominator from the first fraction to the numerator of the second fraction. But let's just go ahead and simplify this one. What number can go into 10 and 4 at the same time? So it's 2. So 10 divided by 2 is what? 5. 10 divided by 4 is 4 divided by 2 is 2. So this is reduced to negative 3 over 4 times negative 5 over 2. Can we simplify this fraction further? No, there is no fraction, no number from the denominator of the first one and the numerator of the second one, or denominator of the second one to numerator of the first one. So this is already simplified. Now we can just multiply across. Negative 3 times negative 5, it's a negative, and negative is positive, so this is 15 over 8. Now when we're doing mixed number, I'm gonna show you how to change this into a mixed number. Okay, but for now the answer is 15 over 8. Let's look at this last example. Negative 6 over 5 divided by 12 over 5. This is a division, so we're gonna change that into a multiplication by keeping the first fraction the same, change the sign, and flip the second fraction. Now we can see that although we cannot simplify each fraction individually, but we can go ahead and simplify. Of course, simplify. So let's look at this one. 5 can go into both this 5 and that 5. 5 from the denominator of the first fraction and 5 from the numerator of the second fraction. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. We just call that cross simplifying, okay? 6 and 12. 6 can be divisible by 6. That's 1. 12 divided by 6 is 2. So this fraction is reduced to negative 1 over 1 times 1 over 2. So negative 1 times negative 1 is negative 1 because one number is negative. And over 1 times 2 is 2. So your answer for this fraction is negative 1/2. Thank you for watching another video. And go ahead and subscribe if you haven't done so. And also don't forget to hit the bell for notification when I post another video.